Welcome to Good Spirit Graphics. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at what MochaBlend can do in Blender's movie clip editor. We'll be working with this part of MochaBlend's panel. Here we are in the default layout of Blender. Let's switch over to the movie clip editor layout. Now your layout may differ a little bit from this, but you can easily adjust it if you'd like. I like to put a timeline at the bottom of my movie clip editor. It's a little more effective than Blender's movie clip editor timeline, which can get cut off by these panels, as you'll see later. Blender's movie clip editor is the most recent addition to Blender's editing windows, and it already has some very powerful features. It will do tracking using point trackers and do camera solves. But like all programs that use point trackers, it does have some limitations. So I'm going to show you what you can do with Mocha data inside Blender's movie clip editor. When we export transform data to the movie clip editor, we export the following properties: layer order, layer name, and layer in-out points. If you remember from the other tutorial, we did a quick roto around this car, put some shapes around it, and tied them all to Mocha's track. Now you can see the layers have different in-out points. You can see the headlights and the grille will pop in and out on different frames. And you'll also see that everything, if you go through the layers, is tied to car front track. Car front track is the plane that we tried to track here on the front of the car. All the other shapes were tied to that. That's one of Mocha's big advantages, is the ability to rotoscope and parent your individual shapes to the track. I'm going to show you how now you can do the same thing in Blender. But first, let's simply export some transform data. With car front track selected, we'll go down to Export Tracking Data, select After Effects Transform Data, and copy to clipboard. Now let's paste that into MochaBlend. We'll drag out our panel a little bit so we can read everything. We have Mocha transform data loaded, 24 frames. Here's our format. We get a Mocha render mismatch, so let's go ahead and import this format into Blender. And we don't need a MochaBlend camera at this point. We're not going to be working in the 3D view with this footage, so we can just leave that alone. Now let's go ahead and drop our footage in. We'll drag it from a folder, drag and drop in here. And you won't see anything here because if you look at our timeline, we're on frame 55. Well, there's only 24 frames, so you're not going to see anything. Let's go ahead and move our timeline over. We can also, as I showed you previously, set our scene frames to match. This jumped to 24 now, and we can hover our mouse over the timeline, press home. That will expand our timeline to the length of our scene frames. Now I mentioned earlier that I like to put a timeline window at the bottom of this layout. That's because this little area down here is the timeline slider for the movie clip editor, but it is partially hidden by this panel and this panel. You can use this to change frames, but I tend not to use this one because it does get hidden by the panels. So let's go ahead and open our panels back up. We can either press this little plus sign here. We can go to View, Tools or Properties, or press T or N on our keyboard. It's nice to get used to keyboard shortcuts in Blender. Blender is famous for its workflow, which involves a lot of keyboard shortcuts. It makes for an uncluttered interface, and I recommend learning them. Blender's movie clip editor has several different modes. I'm going to explain those before we go ahead and paste our data in so you understand how to work with it. We're currently in the tracking mode, and if we click on this, you'll see we have a mask mode, distortion mode, reconstruction, and tracking. If you're not in tracking when you paste in your transform data and press one of these buttons, then MochaBlend will put you in the correct mode for the type of data you're pasting. Now let's go ahead and use our transform data. The only button that highlighted after we pasted it in was Create Transform Tracker. So let's go ahead and press it. And you'll see, if we zoom in a little bit with our middle mouse wheel, we have converted Mocha's transform data to a Blender point tracker. If we move through the scene, you'll see that it is sticking to a particular spot. That point comes from the center of Mocha's surface. If we press on the surface button, you'll see this blue rectangle pops up. That point came from approximately here. This means that we can export any place in the track simply by repositioning the corners of this blue rectangle. If we want to get the corner of this light here, we can just position it here and export again. Now let's paste this export into Mocha and create another tracker. You see it popped up right in the spot where the center of our blue rectangle was. And it's holding right onto that spot nicely. We can turn off motion trails to see things a little more clearly by unchecking Path. There you go, rock-solid trackers from Mocha converted into Blender trackers. Now before we do anything with these trackers, it's important to understand how Blender organizes tracking data. At the top of the hierarchy is the track footage data block here. Connected to this is the tracking object. When we created these two trackers, they were created as part of the camera track. If you want to use these for stabilization and a few other things, you'll have to make sure camera is highlighted when you create your trackers. MochaBlend will create them in the highlighted object. If you have more than one, like an object data block, and you create your transform trackers, they will be created in this data block. For this example, we had camera selected, so we'll be able to use them for stabilization. If we highlight one of our trackers by right-clicking on it, you'll see it pops up in this little panel here, and it says Mocha Translation Data. This track belongs to this camera data block. This camera data block belongs to this footage data block. This is important later when we're working in the compositor. Now let's use these two trackers to do a quick stabilization. We have one selected, and we can go ahead and click on Lock to Selection. If we zoom out a little bit with our middle mouse wheel, you'll see that in the viewport at least, we've stabilized the footage around that point. Now if we want to output a stabilization, we're going to go ahead and move over to Reconstruction. We're going to select one of the trackers, click on 2D Stabilization, select that tracker, Mocha Translation Data, and you'll see now nothing happens. Actually, something is happening, but if we want to see what's happening in our viewport, we need to click under Display on Stable. Now we can see it displayed in the viewport. Now if we want to stabilize rotation also, we can go ahead and click on Stabilize Rotation. We'll select our second tracker, and you'll see now Blender is stabilizing translation and rotation. Now we do have the common black marks here where our footage doesn't exist, so we can click on Auto Scale, and Blender will scale our footage to remove all those spots also. Now as of Blender version 2.69, that's as far as we go with stabilization. We can't stabilize scale here. What we can do is take this into Blender's compositor and output a stabilized footage using translation and rotation. If we want to stabilize with more variety, we can use the compositor section of MochaBlend using Mocha data. We'll take a look at that in another tutorial. Now, if we don't want these trackers right in our view, we might be doing other things and we don't want to see them here. We don't have to create them here actually for stabilization. We'll go ahead and delete these two tracks. When we do our footage jumps, because we still have them assigned to the stabilization, let's go ahead and this time select Offset. We'll create another transform tracker, and this time you don't see it in the view. But if we zoom out and highlight it down here, We'll go ahead and turn back on our path so we can see it better. You'll see it's following the movement just like it did in our footage, but now it's out of our frame, so it's not blocking anything we might want to see. We can just as easily go down to Reconstruction now, assign that tracker. We'll turn off rotation since we only have one. If we wanted to create a second one, we could do so and achieve the same thing we did before and have our trackers out of view. Here we have just translation, and you see it works whether it's in our frame or whether it's way off. Now let's go take a look in the compositor and see how we can use this. We'll switch over to our compositing layout. Blender's compositor has three different modes: shader nodes, compositing nodes, and texture nodes. Make sure compositing nodes is checked and click this checkbox, Use Nodes. This gives us our default setup, which is the render layers node. This is the output from the 3D camera, and the composite node. This is the final output that will be saved to disk when we render out our sequence. We don't need the render layer node, so let's go ahead and select that. Press X for delete or the delete key, and you'll see we can middle mouse scroll around in here. Hold down your middle mouse to move it around. Now we want to add a couple nodes. We can do that a couple different ways. We can either open up this little panel here, and you'll see there is a button for each node. We can also click on the menu, Add, access them here, or we can use the keyboard shortcut, which is Shift-A for Add, and we get a pop-up window showing us what we can add. We're going to go ahead and add, first of all, a movie clip node. Then we're going to add, under Distort, a Stabilize 2D node. We're going to select our footage data block, connect the image output to the image input of the Stabilize 2D node, select the data block that has the stabilized footage information, and then create one more node, which is a viewer node. That allows us to see what we're doing here. Now to see our footage, we can either check Backdrop and see our footage in the node editor, or we can select in the UV image editor, viewer node. Now if we go ahead and move in our timeline here, I'll press Home first to scale it to our scene settings. You'll see we have our stabilized footage. How do we know it's stabilized? Well, if I put my mouse right over the spot that we stabilized with our tracker, I'll use the cursor keys to move our footage, and you'll see that part of the image does not move. There's our fully stabilized image. And if we take a look at it unstabilized, you'll see it's moving all over the place. Now we can speed up our compositing setup here by opening up this panel on the right by pressing keyboard in, going down to OpenCL, and use our graphics drivers to speed up rendering of the node editor. Now, if that's all we wanted to do, we could go ahead, reconnect things the way they were, connect our composite node to our stabilized 2D, go ahead and select an export type, and click on Render Active Scene. We're done. Now let's take a look at the footage. Now you may have noticed when we pressed render, we lost our node editing window here. That's because of this setting right here, display render in image editor. Well, we didn't have an image editor out with render results selected, so Blender stole our window and changed it so we could see the render output. If you don't want that to happen, go ahead and select Keep UI. Now let's go ahead and put things back and go on back to the movie clip editor. Now I walked you through that example to show those of you new to Blender how to render out using the compositor. In practice, you won't want to use Blender's stabilization once you see how MochaBlend can allow you to stabilize your footage more easily than in any other compositing application. So far I've showed you how MochaBlend can convert any point in a tracked area in Mocha into a Blender point tracker. Now let me demonstrate why you would want to do that. Let's go track something in Mocha. Now let's pick out a difficult to track area. We'll go ahead and draw a spline around the area we want. We'll make it in this distant mountainous area. Now this area here has some motion blur in it. It is out of focus and it's low contrast. Let's go ahead and see what Mocha can do. We'll pick Auto Channel and track it. Okay, it looks like it had no problem whatsoever. Now if we go ahead and turn on our surface, this will be the area that we're going to export, the middle of this blue rectangle. Let's go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead and paste this data in. And we'll create a tracker, but let's get rid of our existing trackers here. We don't need these here anymore. Okay, let's create another transform tracker. Now if we select it and select lock to selection, we can scrub the timeline here and you'll see we have a spot that is locked right on, no jitter and no jumping around. And if we zoom way in, you'll see we got a great track here. Now let's go ahead and try to see what a point tracker can do with this same example. Let's turn off lock to selection. We'll go ahead and close down MochaBlend for a second so we can get a little more real estate here. We're going to turn this tracker into an empty one here by going to track, clear track path. Now it shouldn't move anymore. We've erased all the data. Let's go ahead and take a look at our search pattern here. Give it a little room to move around. And see what it can do. Okay, well, let's go ahead and select lock to selection. It didn't make it all the way to the end. And let's see how stable it is. Okay, well we can see right now it is skipping around and it completely fails right around here. So you can see how bad this area is. It's got a lot of motion blur in it. And point trackers are going to fail time and time again. Now I've tried this example with various motion models here, tracking presets and different settings, and it just won't track. Now you're going to find that when you're trying to do a camera solve, there will be times when your error is just too high because of this very problem. But what you can do to salvage your shot is supplement your Blender point trackers with imported Mocha point trackers. Now let's take a look at an area that is not just difficult to track, it's impossible to track. If you remember this triangle example, one of the corners disappears out of view for a while. Now if you're trying to do a 3D solve or object reconstruction, you're going to find times when an area you need is not always in the footage. So if we go ahead and zoom in on that lower right triangle here, you can see I've placed Mocha's blue surface rectangle right on that point. Let's go ahead and export that tracking data for that point and paste it in to MochaBlend. We'll create a transform tracker with it, and you'll see that this tracked area is now available to us even when the footage has it completely out of frame. We can use that point for camera solves, object reconstruction, or other purposes. This is a powerful tool, not available in any other application. Now I'm going to export the other two corners of the triangle to show you something else we can do with transform data. We already exported the bottom right. Let's take the bottom left. We'll paste that in and create another one. Now let's get the top. Let's paste in our final one and create our last tracker. There you go. If I select them all, you can see them nicely, and they're all tracking perfectly with the corners of the triangle. Now the last tool I'm going to show you involves combining trackers together to create an average motion. This function is available no matter what kind of data is loaded into MochaBlend, and if I press it, we'll create an average of the movements of the other two trackers. Now you can do the same thing with more than two trackers. And you see now we have the movements of those three trackers together. You can create complex motions this way and use them in the 3D view and also in the compositor. I'll show you what we can do with trackers in the compositor in a later tutorial when I cover MochaBlend's compositor section. For now, let's see how we can get this movement into the 3D view. Let's go ahead and split our window, create a 3D view. We'll go ahead and clear out everything in our scene here and import our Mocha format first of all. Create a 2D camera. We'll go into camera view, go down to clip and set a background. And then with our tracker selected, we'll be able to go to reconstruction, link empty to track, and you'll see now we have an empty that is matching the translation of our tracker.